whatever is there right now, like, is enough at that exact time. Like, that's exactly what you like need for this like period in your life, even when it feels like shitty or difficult.
Welcome to Normalizing Non-Monogamy, the podcast where we interview incredible people from across the entire spectrum of non-monogamy to hear their fascinating stories. We strive to bring guests on the show who have a healthy approach to non-monogamy. However, it's important to remember that everyone does it a little bit differently, and the views and opinions expressed by our guests do not necessarily reflect our own.
Additionally, we produce this show for entertainment purposes only. Please be aware that we aren't doctors or therapists. Consult a medical professional for anything regarding your health that you might learn about on the show. Enjoy!
Welcome to episode 177. We're Finn and Emma, and today we have a beautiful conversation with Claire. She is polyamorous and has been exploring non-monogamy for about 7 years now. She has recently started a relationship coaching business and called Intuitive Loving. So you're going to want to check that out. But first, go listen to this interview.
Yeah, she'll talk a little bit more about the work she does and sort of her motivation behind it. But before that, we get to hear an awesome conversation with her about sort of her and her partner's adventure into this and how they've grown together and individually. And just, yeah, it's a great conversation. So thank you, Claire.
Yes.
And we appreciate it.
And so we're going to jump into our quick announcements. But first, we have really exciting news.
I didn't know what you were talking about, but then I remembered.
As you're listening to this, if you're listening to this on Wednesday, April 21st, Finn and I are getting our first vaccine, and we're super, super pumped.
Yes, we're going to be pumped full of vaccine.
Tomorrow. Well, because we're recording this on Tuesday.
They don't know that.
So Wednesday.
Way to blow our cover.
Wednesday, we got the vaccine. So likely when you're listening to this, we'll already have the first one.
Yep.
Anyway, we're really excited. And can you tell by all my like reallys and varies in my voice?
And you even forgot what day it was.
Okay. We also wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone who joined our meet and greet on Saturday, this last Saturday. We had over 30 people. It was amazing, super fun.
Virtual meet and greet.
It was. Good caveat. It was a virtual meet and greet. It was all through Zoom. If you don't know what we're talking about, you're going to want to join the next one. It's in May. We have one scheduled for May 20th. It's a Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. More information is available on our website, normalizingnonmonogamy.com. Click on the meet and greet tab. It's only $10 and it's open to anyone.
Yes, and we hope to see you there. And as Emma said, thank you to everybody who came out and made it awesome. We had a great time and met lots of new people.
Yes, we did.
We also wanted to say a huge thank you to the Patreon community that we've got. There's over 160 of you now, so awesome. Thank you. A couple of things coming up. We just had the men's group call yesterday, and the women's group call is tonight, April 21st. So there's time still to join and be a part of that if you would like.
And we'll have more calls in May if you missed these ones.
Yep. And then we have our monthly video Q&A coming up on the 28th of April as well. So we're not going to talk too much more about what Patreon is other than if you're looking for community, you're looking for like-minded people, head over to our website, click on the Patreon tab, read a little bit about it, and take a second thought about maybe joining. And if you don't like it after a month, you can leave.
Yes. And before we jump into the show, we just wanted to say a quick reminder to go to our website, normalizingnonmonogamy.com. There you can find click on the podcast tab. You can see show notes along with pictures of most of our guests. And then you can also go to the contact us button, send us a voicemail, send us an email. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, come on the show.
Yes.
I mean, hey, the show doesn't happen without people like you reaching out.
No, it doesn't. We need people to reach out. So.
And also we respond to every single email.
We do. And voicemail.
Yes. So, reach out. We'd love to hear from you. And also while you're on our website, there is a resources tab. If you're looking for things that we've talked about on the show or things that Emma and I use in our lives that we love, there's some links there. Some of them help support the show financially. Some of them don't. But either way, we wanted to let you know that they're there.
Go check it out.
Check it out. And we will see you in the outro after we talk with Claire.
Yeah, let's go. Well, welcome, Claire, to the show. We're super excited that you reached out to us and that you're here today. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great to meet both of you. I was on one of your virtual meet and greets, and I think that's the first time we met. So it was awesome to meet a whole group of other folks on that call as well.
Yes.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thanks for joining us, and hope you had at least some mild amount of fun. We always have fun on it, but
Yes, definitely.
Well, I mean, we got to know you a little bit then, but not many other people did. Do you mind introducing yourself for the listeners and for us as well?
Yes. So my name is Claire Blossom. I am based in Athens, Georgia, and I'm from England originally. So I have that multicultural experience, I guess, of being from a couple different places. And I am in academia. I have a PhD in a social science, and that's maybe there's something about that led me to the polyam path as well. I'm not sure. But yeah, I live here with my nesting partner of 9 years. I almost said 7 years, and the correct answer is 9. And then I also have a partner who lives nearby that I see on a regular basis as well. But that's just a little bit about me. I am working in academia, but my new venture is a coaching service, which has been building in a really cool way. I'm really excited to be working with folks, having a broad variety of relationships, but I focus on people who feel like they're sort of a misfit when it comes to relationships. They might be polyam, they might be ethically non-monogamous, and they also might be somebody who just feels like they're not quite getting something right. Like there's something about them that doesn't quite fit in. And so I help people, like as somebody who's had that experience myself, I help people work with those ideas about themselves to create what they want to create for themselves in their relationships. So yeah, that's my brief intro.
Awesome.
Yeah, very cool.
So I'm curious, have you and your nesting partner been exploring polyamory your whole relationship, or when were you introduced to non-monogamy?
So only a couple years after getting together, we started to talk about it. When I was introduced to it, I think it's got to be like 2005. So I'm 34. I graduated from college in 2008. Yeah, I remember I was at a very liberal kind of religious group, because I went to Smith College, which is a very kind of out there, very queer space to be in. And there was a polycule that had come, or two of its members had come to this religious group's meeting. So in any other context, I would be like, wow, polyam people going to a religious group. But at Smith College, it was like, oh, this is the radical Catholic feminist religious group. And that was the first time I got firsthand exposure to people who were in a polyam relationship. And I just never thought that much of it. I think I probably stigmatized it a little bit and was like, oh, that's really out there. I could never do something like that. I definitely used to be one of those people who's like, oh, I could never do that. But yeah, then I had been dating my partner for a couple years, and I started to think about I was pretty young, so I was 26, and I saw him as a life partner. And I realized we both saw each other that way, and that we'd like to do that. We'd be like, let's be together indefinitely, right? Let's just keep doing this thing. We really want to. But at the same time, I always just had crushes on other people. In any relationship I'd been in, I would always have a crush on someone else. I didn't think that meant that I couldn't be monogamous. I thought it was just really normal. And I think it is. But it also just sort of prompted me to ask if it was something he'd be willing to try. But I also, he had done that before, he had an open relationship in the past. So I knew that it was something that he was possibly open to as well. Yeah. And so at first it didn't feel like something we both really wanted to explore together. But 6 months later, that's when we decided to really go for it. We had been kind of getting on the same page and just having our own interesting experiences that made him really want to try it as well. So that's how it happened.
Yeah, well, I was just curious, what were the catalysts that went from you started talking about it and you decided that we're not going to do it, to then 6 months later, yeah, let's give it a go? Because I think, I guess I asked that because we hear from a lot of people who are thinking that they're into it and their partner's not, and their partner's just never going to be. And it sounds like you both were at a point where we're we don't really want that, but it's not always a definite forever kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's a really important lesson to get from that. So what happened, actually, I remember I have a really good memory about specific sequences of events that happened and the interesting things that were happening in our lives. So we were both, so it's early 2014. We had both been getting to know we were like befriending new people together, you know, like as a couple, like you have your friends that you get before you meet each other. We had started getting involved with this lefty political campaign locally here in Athens. And I happened to notice like, damn, there's a lot of like attractive people around in these campaigns. There wasn't anyone that I was interested in specifically, but I noticed that my partner would like just, you know, go to more events that went on late and just hang out with people. And I was like, yeah, there's a lot of kind of like attractive, like women around as well. So I just noticed my theory, which I think he's like pretty much confirmed, but my theory was that he was kind of noticing, but like, lots of cool people out there actually. And like a lot of some, well, not a lot, but some of them were also in like open situations too. So that's one part of it. The second part of it is that like, so I was always like open to it. I was just like, yeah, like it's on your time. I see this as like icing on the cake of our relationship. I don't see it as like, we have to do this to make this work, which by the way, I think is something I like, and that's an intentional way of seeing things. Like, I think that we always like, we tell ourselves certain stories about relationships. Like this can't continue unless I'm able to open it up. And I think it's just important to remember that like, no matter how much you believe that, that is something you're like telling yourself too. Like you could also see it in like a totally different way. But I felt on a really genuine level, like this feels like we're enough, you know, we're full together. And also what if we did this? This would be like a really fun way to like spend the rest of our lives. So anyway, he and I go on a family trip. So like I said, I'm from Europe. And so we're on a trip in Spain with some of like 8 baby boomers in my family. So like lots of older folks who would never sit down and talk about this kind of stuff. But we're in our room and I had this weird dream. I haven't been someone who I've never like cheated on anyone before, but I had this dream that I had cheated on my partner and that I needed to tell him about it. And so I just told him like, hey, I had this really weird dream. I cheated on you. Like, obviously I never do that. 'Cause like also part of my personality is like, I'm so loyal. Like I do all the right things all the time, you know? And that's how I was kind of like trying to approach things. Anyway, so I had this dream saying I cheated on you in this dream and I felt really bad about it. And he suddenly just said, well, you know what? If you did, though, that wouldn't be the end of the world. And I was like, what? What do you mean? He's like, well, I've been thinking the past 6 months or so that actually like this is something that I would want to do. So then for the rest of that trip, I just remember like spending time talking about like how we do it and what we do, like in a good amount of depth. And the next couple of months, we started to actually like start, you know, practicing it in an open way.
When you started to go down that path of actually exploring, how did that look like to begin with?
Well, I think we both had crushes on people from our activist work, and we both ended up actually dating those people. So I think there was like a couple people he was interested in, and I was interested in one person. And that person that my partner started dating, they're still together today. And she lives like next door. Like we bought these houses that are right next to each other, that she happened to find, which is a really, really awesome thing. And I dated someone that we dated for like less than a year. I've been on more of like I think I was less interested in like a super long-term thing, like right away. But yeah, so we both kind of, I guess it's kind of like a fun thing. Like, oh, you get to actually like date your crush while like have the exciting feelings of like, I'm dating my crush, like while also the stability of a long-term partnership, you know, like I feel like that can be the like where poly dreams come true, you know, but at the same time, lots of difficulty and all of the insecurity and self-discovery that comes with opening up as well.
Yeah. I mean, do you mind expanding on that a little bit? Because I think that insecurity is something that can really come to the forefront when you, like you said, like we're enough for each other, but you start to see them acting in different ways, feeling in different ways that maybe they're showing more excitement than they have with you in the last year or two. Right. And you start to see the energy coming out of that. And that can really start to make you question like, well, was I actually enough, or were we actually enough without these other relationships?
Yeah, exactly. I think, I really like the garden metaphor, which a polyam friend of mine talks about a lot, who is they're somebody who's dated like a million people at the same time. So I think they really like had to come up with this metaphor. They're like, what does this mean? How do I like take care of these people? But the idea that you have a garden that can sort of like nurture many plants. And so the way I saw it was that like our relationship, as it was just the two of us, like that's like one beautiful garden that's enough. And if it was just me by myself, that's like also a garden that's enough. It's sort of like they're different from one another, right? And then you can have a garden with multiple relationships, and that's like also I guess what maybe I'm using enough in this sort of way that's different from like there's some objective measurement of that. Like, does that make sense?
Like kind of like find the garden that works for you. Is that what you're?
Well, or you can have multiple. Like you don't have to just have one.
Right.
Right. They sort of fulfill different needs.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I'm just also into like a worldview where it's like whatever is there right now like is enough at that exact time. Like that's exactly what you like need for this like period in your life, even when it feels like shitty or difficult. But dealing with his approach, like being with a new partner, it also came up for me, like, yeah, you're really excited to be with someone new. And like, I'm really excited to be with someone new too. I think that was where I first started to raise the question of like, what is normal? Like, how do I know what my new normal is? Clearly, we're doing something that's like way outside the boundaries of what society considers normal. So how do we start to define that? And a lot of that came out of just communication. So we've always been a pretty like very kind of chill couple around conflict, just like not, especially like before we started dating other people. I feel like we just didn't have big conflicts. We started to have more like fiery discussions, you know, about STIs, about excitement about different people. And that's when I started kind of searching for this answer of like, what's normal and healthy in terms of communication. So that was like the first time I like started to try and answer that question for myself.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Did you, I guess for people who are trying to answer that question right now, I know it kind of differs for everyone, but do you have any like thoughts or tips of how to determine like what feels healthy for you in communication wise and in that relationship?
Yeah, I definitely do. And so to clarify, I should say, I use the word healthy. I think it's also important to problematize that word a little bit, or actually kind of a lot, because it can be a really like an ableist term, right? Like why is healthy, like what do we mean by like sort of prioritizing healthy and thinking that's better? But maybe just like what's the relationship you want? Like what's the relationship that feels good to be in general. But I learned about the Gottman Institute, who are these relationship researchers, and their description of so they did research with like monogamous married couples, but I think there's a lot about their research that can be useful for polyam folks too. So they did, and it's called the Love Lab is their research. They did research finding that among married couples that define themselves as happy, there are these 3 different communication styles, and actually neither of those styles like is sort of better than the other one. Like you can have these wildly different ways of communicating and still have a happy long-term marriage. And so one of those styles is nearly completely conflict avoidant. One style is kind of like a kind of a moderate conflict style where you're willing to talk about difficult things and you'll kind of work through things together in this kind of egalitarian way. And then one style is bickering a lot and like very high energy conflict back and forth that might have like a lot of anger or sadness in it as well. So basically like the 2 conflict styles, like avoidance and high conflict, we think that both of those are wrong. Like one is like, oh no, you're avoiding conflict and that's bad. And the other is like, you're fighting too much. But the Gottmans found that those communication styles can absolutely be part of a happy and healthy long-term relationship or marriage, and that it's all about like the way that people prepare conflict, the way they like keep turning towards one another, and also they have this ratio where they counted like 5 positive compared to every one negative interaction. Have you heard of that before?
We've heard of the Gottman Institute.
We've heard of the study, yeah, but
Mm-hmm.
I haven't. I guess I haven't heard it said it in the way that you just did, and that's Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
when interesting.
Yeah,
for sure. And when you started down this path with your partner, like it sounds like you went to Europe, you came back, and you're like, well, let's give it a whirl. Did the two of you like dive into research and trying to learn about this, or did you kind of just write your own adventure to start with?
I'd say a little bit of both. So I know there's some folks I know who are very into like the research and like writing documents that kind of summarize everything they're going to do together. We had been a little bit of both. Again, my kind of background is as a researcher, so I find that useful. And also just designing our own relationship and our own normal. For example, we did both just seem to feel really early on that we didn't want to have like a primary secondary setup, and that we wanted to practice what we would call like non-hierarchical, egalitarian, polyamorous relationships. Like we didn't know that much about it. It just seemed like something that we both valued a lot. Yeah. And so that was like our new, that was the work that we were doing. That was just like writing our own adventure, was like, what does that actually look like in practice?
Yeah. And in doing so, I know you said you were a pretty low conflict couple. When you first started doing this, like, I guess, like, how did it go?
Yeah, I think that we had more conflict, and that's when I was like, is this okay? Is this normal? And then I read about the Gottmans and was like, oh, destigmatizing conflict. I think I was raised to just think that conflict is just not good at all. So it really took a lot of pressure off to be like, no, it's okay to like sometimes have difficult discussions about things that really like touch on a nerve. So I would say, yeah, I think we've been through, I think at first it was, yeah, we would just have these like times of much higher conflict than we had previously. But at the same time, we were both kind of working to normalize it for ourselves, which comes along. If you're trying to normalize something, then there's like also worrying about whether it's okay or not, and this kind of back and forth of like, is this okay? Like, what about that conflict felt a little bit out of bounds to you? What about it felt okay? I don't want to suggest we're the type of couple who like analyze that step by step, because we're just not like at all. Like we're here in the deep South, and like there's just a lot of like chillness involved in the way that people communicate, or sort of passiveness, if that makes sense. Like you're just kind of like, yeah, I'm not necessarily going to give you like a 5-point essay, but like we'll get to where we need to get to. And I think that was also our approach too, is just a little hands off the wheels a little bit, or like taking your foot off the accelerator a little bit and just letting things go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I guess we've talked a little bit about the beginning, and we know your partner has a long-term partner. Where can you describe like what your relationships look like right now?
Yeah. So I live with my partner of 9 years. Until this past August, I lived with my partner and his other long-term partner. Actually, she had a tiny house that was like right next to our house. But in practice, like my theory is like a lot of people in tiny houses don't actually just like live in them all the time, because for her it was just like, well, it's tempting to come into the big house all the time. So we all recently lived in this house together for about 5 years. And so now she lives next door, wanting to have more of her own space. And then she also dates at least one other person. And then I have a partner who I've been dating for almost 2 years, who lives like a mile away.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, living with the three of you living together must have I would imagine, had some growing pains along the way. Maybe I'm wrong, but
yeah, definitely some of the time. It's interesting to think back on it, because there are things about having my own space here that I appreciate so much. And I'm like, that's awesome. But then I think back to how it was before, and I'm like, well, but I was happy there too. And so I think that's another question for me of like creating, it's important to me to be able to create environments where I can be happy and know that like it's less about the specific environment or circumstances, about kind of like what's going on with me and like the way I'm thinking about situations. But yeah, I think there are some growing pains in the first year around how we live in the space together. And then after that, more kind of like allowance of like, well, this is just a lot of compassion to like, this is how this person is. Like they think they've cleaned up. And I'm actually not talking about like a cis male here, but like somebody perhaps thinks that they've cleaned up and you're like, oh, that's how you would clean that up? Okay. Very interesting. Like, I'm sure that you've been really busy this week, you know? So I guess a combination of like being explicit about how we want to live together and also just like a lot of allowance and just letting people be who they are, which is another kind of like big relationship, like I guess value for me is just like this idea of there's a coaching concept from Cara Lowenthal called the human ecosystem, where she talks about like allowing people to be who they are, loving them for who they fully are. And it's like, there's something about their ecosystem where it all like makes sense together. Like if that person's really shy, then maybe that goes along with the fact that they're an introvert and you like them about that, you know, so how our like negative quote unquote qualities can balance out. Like they kind of make sense with what we like about people too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think your point about compassion, like remembering to have compassion, like because we are all human after all, right? So I think that's an important thing to remember too.
Yeah. When you and your partner kind of jumped into this journey together, like over the last, I guess it's been about 7 years or so, right? Am I right? 7 years or so?
Yeah, about 7 years.
How have you each seen each other grow? Like, or how have you seen yourself grow in the last 7 years since you've made this shift?
Yeah, well, what I've realized about myself over that time is that I just keep seeing this pattern come up for me over and over again, which is that there is something going on. There's something about me that's not quite good enough, or that doesn't fit like some ideal in this way that I want to. Like there's some kind of like lack of sufficiency. So when I get to that place where I'm like struggling, I feel totally differently when I'm feeling good or great. Like I feel good about myself. But my insecurities and weak spots are around like, yeah, there's something about me that's not normal, or that's not like quite like it somehow. And having polyamorous relationships has really helped me to like bring that to the surface, and also to normalize it for myself as something that's really common, because I work with so many clients where like that's a core thing for them. I just think it's a core thing for so many people. And to bring that theme out and have it be like, what if this is actually like something that we can really work with? What if it's not something? What if the fact that I think there's something wrong with me is not a sign that something's wrong? Does that make sense? So you're kind of like deeply accepting that place in our brains that comes up and is like, no, there's still like something more to grasp for, which I think is very human. And just, yeah, like through difficulties in polyamorous relationships, like with jealousy, like territory, time and space, that has come up many times over. And now like it just feels more normal, actually. Like I didn't even mean to use that like as a keyword, but it just feels like it goes away. It fades more quickly. The fact that it pops up is less of a big deal. And so because of that, I actually end up feeling a lot closer to that thing that I think is enough. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so were you specifically saying that like you feel that doing or being non-monogamous is the thing that was like making you feel like an outsider, and that having these other relationships and talking to other people in the space has really helped you feel less of that? Or was there just an overall feeling that like, there's got to be something more, I'm not quite being who I want to be?
Yeah, I think it's the latter, that there's
Okay.
always been this pervasive, like, there's something I'm just not quite like getting that other people do get. And just the courage, I guess, that comes along with like being out as polyam in a relatively small community or small city, and then actually practicing it. It's like this like practice in dealing with that as it keeps coming up. And I think you could definitely like get more secure around that insecurity through being monogamous, and you learn that in other ways, right? But I think like my particular path, it's just been like a really important way that I've learned how to like find that sufficiency in myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's huge, because if you're, I mean, coming from someone who struggles with some insecurity of their own, like that's when you feel that way, it's hard to feel like, well, why would somebody else think I'm sufficient if I don't? Right. And so that can really be that can really then pop up all the time. You're always doubting what they think or their feelings.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it leads into a question too. You mentioned like being out. Are you pretty out and open about your relationship style in your community and with your family and friends?
Yeah, in my community, we're pretty out. It's a small city where we've both been like reasonably like actively involved in our community in the past and present. But especially, I feel like I was a lot more active in the past. And people, when my partner started seeing somebody new back in 2014, people would see them together a lot. Like they would go to a farmer's market or a show or something like that. And interestingly, I guess this was one of my first kind of like real struggles of like, what does this mean about me? Like, how do I take this, like information that I'm hearing? How do I process this without just feeling like I'm, this like failure? I started to hear from like mostly like men, I guess, that I knew, that they had seen Chad out with somebody else. My partner's name is Chad. And that they thought he was cheating on me. Like I heard from like 2 or 3 people about that, where they were like I would hear through like the grapevine that somebody had seen them out, and like, whoever heard about it had to like reassured them like, no, they're just like non-monogamous now, like they're poly now. But I find that really challenging at first. First, I felt like there's something a little misogynistic, I guess, about just like the assumption that there was like infidelity involved, that like I wouldn't have had any agency in that situation. And also just suddenly realizing it felt like being on stage, like, oh, everybody can like see my relationships now. And what if they think that she's like cuter than me or more appealing than me in some way? And then like everyone will just know that and be aware of that. And that's where I had to start being like, wait, like, what do I think though? Like, how do I see this situation? How do I want to see this situation? Like this shift from like being very focused on how other people saw me, again, which I think is like a very human thing that lots of us are doing different ways, to like, how do I want to see myself? And I had a bunch of other experiences in life around that same time, like related to non-monogamy and not, that taught me that same lesson like over and over again. But I did find it very challenging to my like ego and self-esteem at the time to be like, oh, people are noticing your partner out with someone else. And I was like, well, I'm out with my partner, but also he lived like an hour away. So it was, it wasn't happening for me on that same level. With my family, also I'm out. I'm always like awkwardly inserting things about my different relationships into conversations. And I found it difficult at different times, but I'd say my family's accepting, but they're not in the sort of like, they're not like asking tons of questions. They're English. They're a little bit traditional. I think they're just not like, it's something they're like, oh, interesting. Well, I would never question what someone else does with their relationships. Like that's their kind of like cultural, like sensibility, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
I'm also curious, one thing we talk a lot about on our show is both physical health and sexual safety. And I'm wanting to know like how you approach that in an open relationship and non-monogamy, keeping yourself personally safe, physically and sexually safe.
Yeah. So with COVID, there's like a smaller number. I guess we have like a pod of people who are linked via relationships, romantic relationships. And it actually really bothers me that it seems like the people who I'm like connected to by pod, it's more romantic relationships than friendship. Like, I feel like I don't want to be living this thing where like romantic partnerships are more important than friendships. And I don't see it that way. It just seems like that's happened because people like may or may not have sex with each other anyway. And then sexual safety. When I started out, my partner and I and like our new partners had this like sexual health and safety Google Doc that we borrowed from some polycule in Portland or like Seattle or one of those like West Coast places. I can't remember. Are you all on the West Coast too? You are,
yeah.
right? Yeah. So what are you in California?
We're in California. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I don't know which one. It's probably, Seattle or Portland. I don't know, but it was a Google Doc, right?
Yeah.
We won't tell on you if you got it wrong. It's okay.
Can't remember where. I just remember being like, oh, people on the West Coast, like I just have this impression of like Portland and San Francisco as being these places where there are way more people practicing polyamory, even though I'm part of this little like community here too. So I was like, well, on the West Coast, like they've really figured this stuff out. So we better use this Google Doc. It seems really thorough. Like these people went to a Ivy League university to learn how to do this. So we use that. But now we have more of an approach around like trust of the individual who's involved. So rather than having guidelines around like specific activities, like if you have only been with someone for 6 months, you will do these activities and you will not do these activities, around safe sex, like being fluid bonded or something like that. Now our approach is more around like trust of the individual involved. Like I trust my partner to make what we both reasonably agree are safer sex decisions with new people. And he and I, like my nesting partner specifically, we're not talking about that together. Like we're not talking about like specifically what he's doing in terms of safer sex with a partner that he has, if that makes sense.
Right. But perhaps like if something were to change or if something were to happen within his network, right, that would then be a conversation that comes back like, oh, hey, so-and-so had this happen with so-and-so, and now we need to do this, this, and this to, whatever this situation may be. Yeah, exactly.
We'll probably have a basic conversation about like, oh, how do you see this person's risk profile? Like, how do you want to approach things? And we might have like 1 or 2 conversations about their, starting a sexual relationship with somebody new, but it's not necessarily like a thing with like a ton of, follow-up conversations, like you said, unless like something changed in somebody's kind of situation.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I was also curious too, like with polyamory, I know there's sometimes like this perception that like you just have an infinite amount of like capacity for partners. And it sounds like right now it's like one for you and sort of one for for Chad. But like, have you hit the polysaturation limit? Like, have you found yours throughout the last 7 years? Like, have you gone to like 3, 4, 5 and been like, nope, I'm a 2, my number's 2 kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So my partner actually is involved with more people, than myself and the other person I've mentioned. Like there's somebody else he's been dating for a year, other people who he has more kind of like crush, like flirtationships with. And I have to ask him about his own polysaturation. I know for my other partner, who I don't live with, I think he's pretty saturated with 2 partners. And I feel saturated too, because I identify as kind of like a secret solo poly person. Like I really love living with a partner. So I'm not interested in not living with him, but I really value like having in the sort of like the Virginia Woolf sense, like literally and metaphorically, like a room of my own, and having the space to just like be with myself, be with my like spiritual practice, and not like always be with somebody else. So in terms of, I think that I would be too saturated to date somebody else. So I think that 2 is definitely my saturation point.
Yeah. And kind of along those lines, and this maybe you kind of just touched on this. I was going to ask, like, when you and Chad opened up, that shift from like, we do all of these things together. It sounds like you were in a lot of activism together. You lived together. You kind of had a life together. And now all of a sudden your time is being divided up, either 2 ways, 3 ways, 4 ways. How did that transition go for the 2 of you?
Well, one thing is, I don't know if we started spending less time together because we had just, we just started living together the same year that we started dating other people. So we hadn't gotten into like a cohabitation arrangement where the other person was just like always around. There is one thing that I have found difficult to find my new normal around, which I feel very differently about, like speaking about it right now, but around weekend time together. I have struggled with, here's what comes up in my mind. I think about an old married couple that has their weekend coming up and they're like, oh, well, what do you want to do this weekend? They're figuring out how they want to like spend it together. This sort of like ideal, like what it means to be happy in old age. And I've had this idea that there's like, if we can't have like completely free, like unbridled time together, like all weekend, that there's something about that that's not like normal, I guess. Like there's something not even normal, just like that things should be that way. Like the way things should be is that we have just like this huge expanse of free time together over the weekend. And so that's been like the one thing that we've had like really big arguments about during the time that we've been together. And it's sort of a strange paradox to me because even when we were monogamous, like on the weekends, I would want to hang out the night before, hang out a little bit the next day, and then go do our own thing. So like in practice, that's kind of more what I actually like want. But there's just this sort of, I guess there's normalcy and there's also FOMO. Like those things kind of stick out for me a lot, and also for clients that I work with. Like a FOMO that like, what if there's this parallel life you could be living where you just have this blissful expanse of time spreading out ahead of you, but instead you have like this more divided time with other partners.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, which is interesting because you sort of chose the non-hierarchical route, which would sort of open that up to be like time is everybody's in a sense, right? It's not like you don't own his weekend any more than one of his other partners owns his weekend at that point, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. At the same time, since we started having relationships with other people, it's been really grounding and helpful. It might not have to always be this way, but it's been grounding to have like a routine of like, these are the times that we spend together. Yeah. I'm sure that some kind of polycules or couples might set that up on a week-to-week basis, but for us, it's pretty like consistent days and times. And so there's something about that, I think, both for me and my nesting partner, my partner, George, who does not live with me, there's something about that just, it slots into our brains really easily and seems to work really well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I can see too how then those weekend times sort of get a higher value placed on them, right? Like that's time where you're not also thinking about your job or something else going on. You can stay up a little later, you can sleep in a little later. And so that time it's a little more precious.
Yeah, it's just
limited.
different. Yeah.
Yeah, I used to see it that way. I don't know that I do so much anymore, just because I do love weekends. I love that like extra time. I've just started to just like with anyone in general. I'm just like, this past weekend, for example, I went for a walk with a friend and I was like, I want to see my friends on the weekends. Like, there's nobody who's telling me what to do with my time on the weekends, but I'm like, why don't I see my friends more? Like, yeah, COVID is one reason, but just kind of, I don't know, that like when I actually ground in what do I really like want with my time, it's not always seeing the person that I also see a lot of the rest of the time. Like I want to have weekend time with my partners. Yes. But that's not necessarily like the whole weekend or like some very specific set of like parameters around the weekend.
Yeah.
And this is also like such an important thing for me. Just like, this is a coaching concept, but that's a very dry way to put it because it's just like completely changed my life. But seeing a circumstance in general, like a Friday night, a Saturday morning, to see that as like something that's kind of qualitatively better or more relaxing time than like a Thursday night or something, it's not super helpful to me because like, it's like the way I'm like, I could be very stressed out on a Friday night or a Saturday morning. Like there's something about like the circumstance itself is not like objectively superior. It's about what I'm thinking and what I'm kind of choosing to think and the kind of intention I'm putting into that space and time. Like I basically like I have more control, more agency in a given circumstance than I really realize. And that has just like totally shifted my life. So I used to be like, yeah, weekends are for fun. Weekday nights are less so. And I'm like, wait, weekday nights are amazing because you work and then you're just like chilling. And what I like working quite a lot, you know, so like having a balance of both is like, that's pretty amazing. So yeah, just like we have certain conventions of like how we see different like times of the week, but sometimes it's like, why? Like, well, what if I want to see it differently? And I find that really empowering.
Yeah, I think love that.
Yeah, I love that too. Thank you for explaining a little bit more about how you view that. I think it's really helpful. And I was also wondering, have you and your nesting partner, or even just you by yourself, considered exploring other different types of non-monogamy in any other ways? Like, for example, more of a swinging dynamic or anything like that with any of your partners. Has that ever come up?
No, that hasn't come up around swinging. I think it's a really interesting subculture and one that I don't know too much about. It's just, I that hasn't really come up.
Yeah, I was just curious because it's always fascinating to see like how and why, or learn how and why people choose the path of non-monogamy that they do.
Yeah.
And we talk to a lot of people who seem to blend the two.
Yeah.
We've talked to people in polyamorous relationships who swing with some of their partners, and we talk to people who swing with some and they have deep relationships with others. So there's a lot of fluidity and blurring of lines. So it's just an interesting to see how different people approach it.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah. We also like to end the interviews, or get towards the end. We like to ask a fun question about bloopers that may have happened in your relationships, because we like to show that relationships and sex are not always as perfect as they might seem. So if you have anything that comes to mind that would just be kind of a lighthearted, it doesn't have to be exactly sex related. It can be relationship related too.
Yeah. Let me think about that for a second. Oh man. I have to think about how like both my partners have beards, and so someone will be like, oh, which one's which, but they don't really look like each other, so it's not really like an actual clone situation. I guess, yeah, here's one which I feel like this kind of speaks to like toxic monogamy culture too, but the first year that my nesting partner was dating his partner, who used to be his nesting, lives next door. She is from an area of South Carolina that's pretty close to where my parents live. And so we decided that she would come like stay at my parents' house for like a night. It was just like a logistics of traveling situation. We're like, yeah, can our friend come stay? Like we were not out yet. It's just like, oh, this mysterious friend wants to come. And so I guess my dad I kept noticing him kind of like looking at us and just like he was figuring out some mystery. Like he kept like, he was like, aha, like I see what's going on here. And he was like, I guess he thought he had figured out that my partner's other partner was like trying to steal my man, basically. And so this was not offensive to me at all. Like it came up later on and we just like talked and laughed about it. But it was like, oh, like I could just see him because like my dad's like this very smart man. I could just see him kind of being like, aha, I think I figured it out. Like he's trying to get Claire's partner. And I was like, okay, sure. Like that's not so much. But when you're seeing through things through your monogamy lens, like there's only one option, right? Like there's no possibility anything else could be going on.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. It's hard when, that's, you don't have that framework that like, oh, potentially this is all on the up and up. But,
right. Yeah. Make assumptions.
Yeah.
We'd also like to give you the opportunity to, I know you do have a coaching business. And so if you'd love to, we'd love it for you to talk a bit more about it here.
Yeah, 100%. So my business is called Intuitive Loving, and I am a coach. And what I do in that work is I work with folks who are interested in getting past that point of thinking that there's something about themselves that like should be different, something about their relationships that should be different than exactly how it is. So getting from a place of insecurity to like deep security, deep sufficiency around who you are, who you want to be in your relationships. And of course, being a polyam person, I focus a lot on ethically non-monogamous polyam folks. Like I said, I also work with people who consider themselves in some kind of unconventional relationship. And so doing one-on-one coaching in the past couple years of my life has just completely changed my kind of self-concept. I had done therapy before that. I'd done meditation and, spiritual practice. Those have all been massively helpful to me. And then coaching, it was like it was kind of like, okay, you're training the rocket. You're getting the rocket ready for takeoff and you're putting it together. You're putting it in good shape. And that's like these other practices. And then coaching is just something about the rocket just taking off. So I'm super just like dedicated to the field, and the practice of coaching is something that helps us like get to those like impossible goals that we didn't think were possible, like for some people, for a lot of people, that can just be like feeling like I'm not just sort of okay in my relationships, but actually like I'm awesome. My relationships are awesome. Any issues we have, we're going to work through them, and getting, you think that somebody else is secure in relationships and it's never going to be me, but that actually can be you. And that's like the key message that I bring to people.
Awesome.
Yeah. I love it.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah. Do you have anything?
No, I was just going to say links to everything. All of your information will be in our show notes so people can easily find you without having to do too much hunting. So that's a little bit for the listeners. And then, is there anything else that we didn't talk about that you wanted to share or leave with the listeners before we let you get along with your evening?
Yeah, I think just one more thing that's really important to me around polyam, ethically non-monogamous relationships is that there's something where we have decided to have relationships that are not exactly what mainstream society says we should be doing. And so I think there's a point at which we have to do more work to figure out not just what is right or how things should be, but how we actually want things to be. And I think that sometimes people see like doing that extra work as extra work, right? Like it's not fun. It's like a bad, it's a negative like kind of side effect that comes with pursuing the kind of relationships you want. But I want to suggest that it's actually better because we get to radically define what we want. Like maybe partners decide that because of one person snores all the time, they don't want to sleep in the same bed. And instead of making that something about like, oh, that's a sign that there's something wrong with our marriage, our relationship, things shouldn't be this way, you could decide like, actually, this is awesome for our relationship and our marriage. And this is exactly what we want. And actually studies show that like couples who sleep separately and feel fine about it, like end up having like much better relationships. Like that doesn't mean like you can sleep together and have good, really much better relationships too. But if you have some serious, like, a snoring issue and you want to separate beds, like that can actually be this like massive booster to the quality of your relationship. But the key message is that like anything that you feel shame around or like a should around how you think a relationship has to be, but there's some force pulling you to do something different, just examine like, why do I think things have to be this way? Why is this should here for me? Is it because of some completely made up concept about like what a relationship is supposed to be, what intimacy means, and find like the creative ways to redefine intimacy for yourself. And that's like the superpower I think that comes with being ethically non-monogamous, is that we get to do that just like over and over again. And as we're like in many ways pushed to do that work, it can also be this like deeply liberating path for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
I love
awesome.
it. Thank you. And I like that message of basically, just not doing things just because everybody around you says that's the way to do it, like actually questioning it and figuring out what's best for you, regardless of what anybody else says or does or thinks. I mean, and that's tough to do. That takes that's a lifetime practice.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be easy actually to find new norms within ethically non-monogamous communities, like, oh, well, obviously, like, this is how a certain partnership should look. Like, everybody, there's still, like, these shoulds, like, below the surface. My kind of way of seeing things, and this also comes from the Gottmans, is, do you have respect, trust, and affection in your relationship? Are these things that are present and that you both, not both really, but like, do all partners think that those are important things? And when you have those foundations, like the sky's the limit in terms of how, unconventional you can get and be happy in what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. I love it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for everything today. It's been fantastic chatting. And
thank you so much.
Thank you. And we'll let you get along with your Georgia evening, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you. Have a great afternoon.
And we're back. Thank you so much, Claire, for reaching out to us and for all the amazing work you do and for sharing your beautiful story. So we love talking to you. Thank you again.
Yeah, it's awesome. And also, thanks for being so out and open in your community. I know that's not always easy to do, but it sounds like you and your partner and partners have built a pretty awesome poly network down there in Georgia. So congrats on that. And thank you for helping to normalize non-monogamy. Dun, 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 dun.
Nailed it.
All right. What else? We just wanted to remind people again, we've got a meet and greet coming up on May 20th from 6 to 9 p.m. Again, links on our website.
6 to 8 p.m. Pacific. It doesn't matter. They can go go to our website, click on the meet and greet tab. The details are there.
You sound annoyed with me. I'm like, I'm going to leave this in so people can hear what happens when I make a mistake.
I just like to point it out.
And tonight, there's the women's call for the Patreon group. Again, thank you to all of the amazing Patreon patriots.
Oh my gosh.
I'm going to stop. Thank you. The men's call was last night, so you missed that one, but there will be another one in May. And we have our Q&A coming up next week, next Wednesday on April 28th. And Emma and I just got vaccinated. I think that's all the update recaps.
It is. I just want to note, too, on the men's and women's groups calls, these are open to anyone that identifies with those groups. So we're trying to come up with better names and what to do with those. But we just want to make sure it's clear that if you're interested in joining, please come join.
Yeah, they are safe spaces for anyone who would like to join. We've had non-binary people join in the past and have gotten feedback that they felt super safe and welcome in both groups.
Yes.
So we just kind of wanted to point that out. Thank you again to the Patreon people for making that amazing and welcoming.
It's a lovely community, wonderful community.
All right, enough rambling.
Next week, we got our interview with Kat.
Yep.
Another cat.
We have a cat from a while ago with 1 T.
Uh-huh.
We've got a cat with 2 T's.
Uh-huh.
And then in 2 weeks we've got Kitty.
Uh-huh.
So don't get confused. They're not all
the same people.
No, they're not. Nevertheless, we're excited for that. It's a great conversation. And Kat's been on a bunch of the meet and greets.
She has.
So that's awesome. So anyway, we will see you in a week with that. And we're excited to be vaccinated.
Woohoo!
at least halfway vaccinated.
Halfway vaccinated. We're in this beginning.
Well, you know what? We'll probably give you an update when we get the other half.
Of course, well, we're going to be excited. So,
All right.
of course. It'll probably be in about a month. Since that's what the standard is.
Thank you for explaining that.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Thanks for listening.